Before we start, if you're new here, this channel shares real stories from people who work the job. Law enforcement, first responders, people who've seen things they can't explain. If that's something you're into, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming. Now tonight's story. This one kept me up for a while. A police officer responds to a routine call, suspicious person at a park. Nothing unusual. He approaches, has a conversation, checks the guy out, everything comes back clean. He lets him go and drives back to the station. Just another night on the job. Except, when he gets back and downloads his Bodycam footage, something is wrong. Something that doesn't make any sense. Because on that video, there's no one there. He's talking, gesturing, asking questions. To an empty bench. To thin air. This is his story. And I'm going to let him tell it in his own words. Let's get into it. I need you to understand something before I tell you this story. I'm not the kind of guy who believes in any of this stuff. Ghosts, spirits, the paranormal, whatever you want to call it. That's for movies. That's for people who have too much time on their hands and not enough real problems to deal with. I've been a police officer for 15 years in a mid-sized city in Ohio. I've seen the worst that humanity has to offer. I've seen what people do to each other when they think no one is watching. I've pulled bodies out of rivers. I've held pressure on gunshot wounds. I've told mothers their sons aren't coming home. After you see that kind of thing over and over again, you stop believing in fairy tales. You become a realist. You trust what you can see, what you can touch, what you can document. My name is Michael, and at the time this happened, I was working the night shift. Third shift, we call it. 11 at night to 7 in the morning. It's the shift nobody wants, but after enough years, you get used to it. The city is different at night. Quieter in some ways, louder in others. You deal with a lot of drunk drivers, domestic disputes that finally boil over, bar fights, the occasional burglary in progress. It's not glamorous work. Most of the time, it's boring. You spend hours driving around, checking on things, waiting for something to happen. And when something does happen, you handle it the best you can and move on to the next call. This particular night was in late October. I remember that because the temperature had just started to drop, and you could see your breath when you stepped outside. It was one of those crisp autumn nights where the air feels clean and everything seems still. I was about 6 hours into my shift, and it had been dead quiet, almost unusually quiet. I'd responded to one noise complaint earlier, turned out to be a raccoon knocking over trash cans. Other than that, nothing. I was parked in a lot behind a closed grocery store, finishing up some paperwork on my laptop, counting down the hours until I could go home, take a shower, and get some sleep. I remember looking at the clock on my dashboard. It was just past 4 in the morning. That's the dead zone, we call it. Too late for the bar crowd, too early for the morning commuters. The city is at its quietest right around that time. I was thinking about what I was going to have for breakfast when I got home. I was thinking about the football game I'd recorded and hadn't watched yet. Normal things. Mundane things. The kind of thoughts you have when you've done this job long enough that it becomes routine. I had no idea that in about 20 minutes, something was going to happen that would change the way I see the world. My radio crackled to life, and dispatch came through with a call. Suspicious person reported at Riverside Park, near the east entrance by the old bridge. Caller said there was a man sitting alone on one of the benches, just staring. Not moving, not doing anything, just sitting there. The caller thought it was strange, said it gave them a bad feeling. I acknowledged the call and put my car in drive. It was probably nothing. Maybe a homeless guy looking for a place to sleep. Maybe someone who had too much to drink and was trying to sober up before going home. I'd handled 1,000 calls just like this one. Riverside Park is one of those places that's nice during the day but feels completely different at night. It runs along the river for about a mile with walking paths, benches, a few pavilions for picnics. Families go there on weekends. Kids play on the playground. But at 4 in the morning, with no lights except for a few old lampposts that barely work, it's a different place entirely. The trees cast long shadows, the river sounds louder than it should, and you can't shake the feeling that you're being watched. I'd been there plenty of times on patrol. It was a known spot for drug deals, for teenagers sneaking out to drink, for the occasional person looking to harm themselves. Nothing I couldn't handle. I pulled into the parking lot near the east entrance and killed my headlights. Standard procedure. You don't want to announce your arrival any more than necessary. I sat there for a moment, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness, scanning the area for any movement. The park looked empty from where I was sitting. Just trees, shadows, and the faint shimmer of the river in the distance. I grabbed my flashlight, checked my Bodycam to make sure it was recording, and stepped out of the car. The cold hit me immediately. That October chill that cuts right through your uniform. I could see my breath in the air, little clouds of vapor disappearing into the night. I started walking toward the area where the caller had reported seeing someone. The path was gravel, and my footsteps sounded too loud in the silence. I swept my flashlight back and forth, checking the benches, the tree line, the shadows under the pavilion. Everything looked normal, empty. I was starting to think this was going to be another waste of time. The caller probably saw a shadow, got spooked, and called it in. It happens more often than you think. People see what they want to see, especially at night, especially when they're already on edge. I was ready to call it in as unfounded and head back to my car, but then I saw him. There was a man sitting on one of the benches near the river, maybe 50 yards from where I was standing. He was just sitting there, perfectly still, facing the water. I stopped walking and watched him for a moment. He wasn't moving at all, not shifting his weight, not looking around, nothing, just sitting. There was something about the stillness that caught my attention. It wasn't natural. People fidget, they adjust their position, they do something. But this guy was like a statue. I took a breath, tightened my grip on my flashlight, and started walking toward him. This was the job. Approach, assess, handle. I'd done it 1,000 times before. Now I want you to pay attention to what I'm about to describe, every detail. Because later, when I tell you what I saw on that Bodycam footage, you're going to want to remember this. You're going to want to compare what I experienced in that moment with what the camera recorded. And I promise you, it's not going to match. Nothing about that night makes sense. I've gone over it in my head more times than I can count, and I still don't have an answer. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you what happened when I approached that bench. Let me tell you about the man I met that night. The man who, according to every piece of evidence I have, never existed. I walked toward the bench, keeping my flashlight steady, watching the figure as I approached. The gravel crunched under my boots with every step, and I remember thinking that he must have heard me coming. There's no way he didn't. The park was dead silent, not even a breeze rustling through the trees. And my footsteps sounded impossibly loud in that stillness. But he didn't move, didn't turn around to see who was approaching, didn't acknowledge my presence at all. He just sat there, facing the river, like he was waiting for something. Or like he didn't care that a police officer was walking up behind him. That bothered me a little, but I pushed it aside. Some people freeze when they see law enforcement. Some people are just oblivious. I'd seen both plenty of times. As I got closer, I started to make out more details. He was wearing a dark jacket, something like a work coat, the kind you'd see on someone who works outdoors. Blue jeans, work boots that looked worn but not old. His hair was dark, cut short, and he had his hands resting on his knees. He looked like a normal guy, maybe late 30s, early 40s. Nothing about him screamed danger or threat. He looked like someone who might work at a factory or a warehouse or any of the dozens of blue-collar jobs in this city. Just a regular man sitting on a bench. But something about the scene felt wrong, and I couldn't put my finger on what it was. I was about 20 feet away when I announced myself. "Police officer," I said. "Just checking on you, making sure everything's okay." My voice sounded strange in the silence, like it was being swallowed by the darkness around us. He turned his head then, slowly, and looked at me. And here's where I need you to really pay attention. His face was normal, completely normal. Average features, clean-shaven, nothing remarkable about it. But his eyes, there was something about his eyes that I noticed but didn't really process at the time. They were dark, almost black in the low light, and when he looked at me, it felt like he was looking through me. Not at me, through me. Like he could see something behind my eyes that I couldn't. He smiled when he saw me. A polite smile, the kind you give a stranger when you don't want any trouble. "Evening, officer," he said. "Or I guess it's morning now, isn't it?" His voice was calm, measured, friendly even. Nothing threatening about it. I relaxed a little bit, let my hand drop away from my belt. This didn't feel like a situation that was going to go sideways. He seemed cooperative, alert, not intoxicated or aggressive. Just a guy sitting in a park. I asked him what he was doing out here so late, and he said he couldn't sleep, thought some fresh air might help. Sighed he lived nearby and liked to come here sometimes to think. It was a reasonable answer. I'd heard similar explanations 100 times before. I moved closer and stood a few feet in front of him, positioning myself so I could see his hands clearly. That's basic training. You always watch the hands. He kept them on his knees, didn't make any sudden movements, didn't seem nervous at all. I asked him if he had any identification on him, and he nodded, said it was in his back pocket, asked if it was okay to reach for it. I appreciated that. A lot of people just dive for their pockets without thinking, and that's how situations escalate. He was being careful, respectful. He reached back slowly, pulled out a wallet, and handed me a driver's license. I shined my flashlight on it, looked at the photo, looked at his face. It matched. The name on the license was David Miller. The address was local, just a few blocks from the park. Now here's where I need to tell you about something I noticed but dismissed at the time. While I was looking at his license, I was also observing him the way you do when you've been on the job for a while. You take in details without even thinking about it. And I noticed that I couldn't see his breath. It was cold that night, cold enough that I could see my own breath every time I exhaled, little clouds of vapor hanging in the air. But when he spoke, when he answered my questions, there was nothing. No vapor, no condensation, nothing. His words just came out into the cold air and disappeared. I noticed it, but I told myself he must just be breathing differently, or maybe I wasn't paying close enough attention. Your mind does that. It fills in explanations for things that don't make sense. I handed his license back to him and asked him a few more questions. How long had he been out here? About an hour, he said. Did he see anyone else in the park? No, just him. Was everything okay at home? Everything was fine. He just had trouble sleeping sometimes. His answers were normal, conversational, exactly what you'd expect from someone who wasn't doing anything wrong. I was already starting to think about how I was going to write this up. Welfare check, subject contacted, no issues, cleared the scene. Just another nothing call on a quiet night. I was ready to tell him to have a good night and head back to my car. But then something else happened that I didn't fully register until later. I had my flashlight pointed at him, the beam hitting his chest and face. And for just a second, just a fraction of a second, the light seemed wrong. It's hard to explain. You know how when you shine a flashlight on someone, you can see the light reflecting off their skin, their clothes, their eyes? There's a solidity to it. The light hits them and stops. But for that brief moment, it almost looked like the light was going through him. Like he wasn't quite solid. Like he was there, but also somehow not there. I blinked, and it was normal again. He was sitting there, solid as anyone, looking at me with that polite expression. I told myself I was tired. 6 hours into a night shift, eyes playing tricks on me. It happens. I asked him one more time if he was sure everything was okay, if he needed anything. He shook his head and thanked me for checking on him. Said it was nice to know the police were looking out for people. I told him to take care of himself and to head home soon since it was getting cold. He said he would. I turned around and started walking back toward my patrol car. the gravel crunching under my feet again. I didn't look back. There was no reason to. Just a normal interaction with a normal person on a normal night. At least, that's what I thought. That's what I believed with absolute certainty until I got back to the station and watched the footage from my Bodycam. That walk back to my car felt longer than it should have. The park seemed darker somehow, quieter, like the night itself was pressing in closer. I remember getting into my car and sitting there for a moment before starting the engine. I looked in my rearview mirror, back toward the bench where I'd left him. I couldn't see much, just shadows and the faint outline of trees. But for some reason, I felt uneasy. Not scared, exactly, just off. Like something wasn't right, and my brain was trying to tell me what it was, but the message wasn't getting through. I shook it off, started the car, and drove back to the station to finish my shift. I had no idea what was waiting for me. No idea that everything I thought I knew about that night was about to fall apart. Here's the thing about being a cop. You develop instincts. After 15 years of doing this job, you learn to read people in ways that civilians never have to. You can tell when someone is lying before they even finish their sentence. You can feel when a situation is about to go bad, like a pressure change in the air before a storm. Your body knows things before your conscious mind catches up. And standing there in that park, talking to this man on the bench, something felt off. I knew it then. I felt it in my gut. That little voice in the back of my head whispering that something wasn't right. But here's the problem with instincts. They're not evidence. They're not probable cause. You can't write in your report that you detained someone because you had a bad feeling. So when you can't articulate what's wrong, you let it go. And that's exactly what I did. The conversation continued in the most ordinary way possible. I asked him about his job, and he told me he worked at a manufacturing plant on the east side of town. Third shift, he said, just like me. He'd gotten off work a few hours ago but couldn't wind down, so he came out here to clear his head. The story made sense. It was exactly the kind of thing someone would do. I'd done it myself plenty of times after particularly rough shifts. Driven to some quiet spot just to sit and decompress before going home to my family. Everything he said was plausible. Everything he said was exactly what an innocent person would say. And yet, the more he talked, the more that feeling in my gut intensified. Something was wrong, and I couldn't figure out what it was. I found myself studying his face more closely as he spoke, trying to identify what was bothering me. His features were completely average. Brown eyes, straight nose, thin lips that curved into a slight smile whenever he answered a question. He had a small scar above his left eyebrow, the kind you might get from a childhood accident. A few days' worth of stubble on his jaw. Everything about him was normal, unremarkable, the kind of face you'd see in a crowd and immediately forget. But his eyes never moved the way eyes should move. When people talk to you, their gaze shifts naturally. They look at your face, your hands, the environment around you. They blink, they glance away, they refocus. His eyes stayed fixed on mine the entire time, unblinking, unwavering, like he was studying me just as much as I was studying him. I asked him more questions, partly because it was procedure and partly because I was trying to figure out what was setting off my alarm bells. Did he come to this park often? Sometimes, he said, once or twice a month when he couldn't sleep. Did he know the area well? Pretty well. He'd lived here most of his life. Did he have any family at home waiting for him? A wife, he said, but she was a heavy sleeper, wouldn't even notice he was gone. Every answer was delivered in that same calm, measured tone. No hesitation, no nervousness, no variation in his voice at all. Most people, even innocent ones, get a little anxious when they're being questioned by a police officer. They fidget, they talk too fast, they over-explain. He did none of that. He was perfectly composed, unnaturally composed. I ran his information through dispatch while we talked, gave them his name, date of birth, and the address from his license. They came back a few minutes later with the results. No warrants, no criminal history. The address matched the license. Everything checked out clean. David Miller was exactly who he said he was, at least according to every database we had access to. I should have felt relieved. A clean check means the interaction is almost over, means I can clear the call and move on with my night. But instead, that uneasy feeling got worse. It was like the universe was telling me something was wrong, and I was too stupid or too stubborn to listen. I kept looking for a reason to extend the contact, to dig deeper, but I had nothing, absolutely nothing. While I waited for dispatch to finish the check, I tried to make small talk. It's a technique you learn, keeping people engaged while you run their information, watching for any changes in behavior that might indicate deception. I asked him about the manufacturing plant, what they made there. Auto parts, he said. Brake assemblies mostly. I asked if he liked the work. It pays the bills, he replied with that same slight smile. I asked if he'd heard about the new development they were building on the other side of town. He said he had. Every response was appropriate but generic, like he was reading from a script of what a normal person would say in this situation. There was no personality behind the words, no individual quirks or opinions, just perfectly acceptable answers delivered in a perfectly acceptable tone. I noticed more small things as the conversation went on, things that didn't make sense but that I kept explaining away. His clothes looked worn but clean, which was normal enough, but they also looked somehow old-fashioned, like the style was from a different decade. The cut of his jacket, the way his jeans sat on his waist, even his work boots had a quality to them that seemed dated. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Not everyone keeps up with fashion, especially blue-collar guys who just want something functional. But there was also the way he sat, perfectly still, his posture never shifting even slightly. People move. They adjust their weight, cross and uncross their legs, shift their shoulders. He sat like a photograph, like someone had posed him there and he was waiting to be told he could move again. The thing that bothered me most, though, was the silence around him. I don't mean that he was quiet, because we were talking the whole time. I mean the actual silence, the absence of ambient sound. When I was walking up to him, I could hear the river in the background, the water flowing over rocks somewhere downstream. I could hear the rustle of leaves, the distant hum of traffic on the highway a few miles away. But standing in front of him, having this conversation, all of that seemed to fade away. It was like we were in a bubble, a pocket of stillness that separated us from the rest of the world. I didn't notice it consciously at the time. It was only later, replaying everything in my head, that I realized how wrong it had been. Dispatch confirmed everything was clear, and I made the decision to let him go. I didn't have any legal reason to detain him. He wasn't committing any crime. He wasn't trespassing since the park was public property. He wasn't intoxicated or in danger. He was just a man sitting on a bench in the middle of the night, and that's not illegal no matter how strange it might seem. I told him to have a good night, to stay safe, and to maybe head home soon since the temperature was dropping. He thanked me, said he appreciated me checking on him, said he'd probably head out soon. His voice was warm, genuine, like he really meant it. I nodded, turned around, and started walking back to my patrol car. Every step I took, I expected to hear something behind me. Footsteps, movement, something, but there was nothing. Just silence. I didn't look back. I wanted to, but I didn't. It felt like if I turned around, something would be different. I don't know how to explain that feeling, but it was overwhelming. Just keep walking, I told myself. Get to the car, finish the shift, go home. You're tired. You're imagining things. There's nothing wrong here. I got back to my patrol car, opened the door, and sat down heavily in the driver's seat. I took a breath and finally looked in the rearview mirror, back toward the bench. I couldn't see much in the darkness. Just shapes, shadows, the vague outline of where I'd been standing. I told myself he was probably already walking home. I started the engine, pulled out of the parking lot, and drove away. I had no idea that everything I just experienced, every detail I'd noticed and dismissed, was about to be contradicted by my own Bodycam footage. I had no idea that the man I'd spent 10 minutes talking to didn't exist. The drive back to the station was uneventful. I took the same route I always take, past the closed storefronts on Main Street, past the 24-hour gas station where the night clerk waved at me through the window, past the empty intersections with their blinking yellow lights. The city was still asleep, and I was counting down the minutes until my shift ended and I could join it. The unease I'd felt in the park was already fading, replaced by the familiar exhaustion that comes at the end of a long night. I turned on the radio, caught the tail end of a song I liked, and by the time I pulled into the station parking lot, I'd almost convinced myself that there was nothing strange about that encounter at all. Just a guy on a bench. Just another call. Just another night. I parked in my usual spot and sat there for a moment, gathering my things. My notebook, my coffee thermos that had been empty for hours, the wrapper from the granola bar I'd eaten around midnight. The small rituals of ending a shift. I could see a few other officers through the windows of the station, some finishing up their own paperwork, others just starting their day shift. The fluorescent lights inside looked harsh compared to the soft darkness I'd been driving through. I grabbed my stuff, got out of the car, and walked inside, nodding at the sergeant behind the front desk as I passed. He barely looked up. That's how routine it was. That's how normal everything seemed. The Bodycam download station was in a small room off the main hallway. Just a desk, a computer, a few charging docks, and a corkboard with memos nobody ever read. I went through the process on autopilot because I'd done it hundreds of times before. Removed the camera from my vest, plugged it into the dock, opened the software on the computer, initiated the transfer. The footage would upload to our server where it would be stored for 90 days unless it was flagged for an investigation. Most of it would never be watched by anyone. Just hours and hours of mundane interactions, traffic stops, welfare checks, the tedious reality of police work that nobody sees on television shows. While the footage transferred, I started working on my reports from the night. The noise complaint with the raccoons, which took about 30 seconds to document. The suspicious person call at Riverside Park, which I wrote up as a welfare check with no issues identified. Subject contacted, identified as David Miller, no warrants, no signs of distress or criminal activity, cleared the scene. I typed it all out without really thinking about it, the words flowing automatically from muscle memory. I'd written the same kind of report so many times that I could probably do it in my sleep. Name, date, time, location, nature of contact, disposition. Fill in the blanks, hit submit, move on. That's the job. The upload finished with a soft chime from a computer, and I was about to log out and head home when something made me pause. I don't know what it was. Maybe that lingering unease from the park that I hadn't fully shaken. Maybe just the fact that I had a few minutes to kill before the day shift officially relieved us. Whatever the reason, I decided to skim through the footage. Not watch the whole thing, just skip to the park call. Make sure the video looked okay, confirm that everything matched what I'd written in my report. It was something I did occasionally, especially after interactions that felt even slightly unusual. Just a quick quality check, just being thorough. I found the timestamp for when I'd arrived at the park and clicked play. The footage started with me getting out of the patrol car, the camera capturing the view from my chest as I walked toward the east entrance. I could see my flashlight beam sweeping across the gravel path, the dark shapes of trees on either side, the distant glimmer of the river. So far, everything looked exactly as I remembered it. I watched myself walk down the path, the audio picking up the crunch of my footsteps, the sound of my breathing in the cold air. I was waiting to see the bench, to see the man I'd talked to confirm that the interaction had happened exactly the way I remembered. What I'm about to tell you, I've watched that footage maybe 200 times. And every single time, I hope it's going to be different. I hope I'm going to see what I know I saw that night. I hope the man is going to be there, sitting on the bench, turning to look at me, answering my questions. Every single time I tell myself that maybe I missed something. Maybe the video was corrupted. Maybe there's an explanation that makes sense. And every single time, the footage shows me the same thing, the exact same impossible thing. I watched myself approach the bench, On the screen, I could see the camera angle shift as I stopped walking, as I positioned myself the way I always do when making contact with someone. I watched my flashlight beam land on the bench, illuminating the wooden slats, the metal armrests, the empty space where David Miller should have been sitting. Except he wasn't there. The bench was empty, completely empty. I was standing in front of a vacant bench, talking to no one, gesturing at nothing. On the audio, I could hear my own voice, clear as day. "Police officer, just checking on you." But there was no response. No voice answering my questions. Just silence and my own words echoing into the empty park. I stopped the video and stared at the screen. My heart was pounding in my chest so hard I could hear it in my ears. I told myself there had to be a glitch, a malfunction, some kind of technical error. These cameras aren't perfect. Sometimes they lag, sometimes they skip, sometimes the footage gets corrupted during upload. I rewound the video and watched it again. Same thing. I was walking up to an empty bench. I was having a conversation with thin air. I could hear myself asking questions, waiting for responses, responding to answers that didn't exist on the recording. I looked like a crazy person standing in an empty park, talking to himself in the middle of the night. I sat there for a long time, staring at the frozen image on the screen. The bench, empty. The park, empty. No David Miller, no suspicious person. No one at all except me. My hands were shaking as I reached for the mouse and I realized I was holding my breath. I let it out slowly, trying to calm down, trying to think rationally. There had to be an explanation. There's always an explanation. But even as I told myself that, I knew something was deeply, terribly wrong. I had talked to that man. I had seen him clearly. I had looked at his driver's license, read his name and address. I had watched him breathe, watched him smile, watched him nod at my questions. And according to my own Bodycam, according to the only objective record of what happened that night, none of it was real. He was never there. I need you to really understand this. I'm not telling you a story I heard from someone else. I'm not repeating an urban legend or something I read on the internet. This happened to me. I spoke to that man. I saw him with my own eyes, standing 3 feet in front of me. I remember his face, every detail of it. The scar above his eyebrow, the stubble on his jaw, the way his lips curved when he smiled. I remember his voice, calm and polite, answering every question I asked. I remember what he was wearing, the dark work jacket, the blue jeans, the worn boots. I remember the driver's license in my hand, the weight of it, the feel of the plastic. I remember handing it back to him and watching him slip it into his wallet. But on that camera, on that footage that recorded everything my eyes were supposed to be seeing, I'm standing in an empty park, talking to nothing, talking to no one, talking to air. I played the footage again from the beginning, watching every second with desperate attention. The video showed me getting out of the patrol car, closing the door, adjusting my flashlight. It showed me walking down the gravel path, the beam of light sweeping left and right across the trees and benches. The audio captured my footsteps, the crunch of gravel, even the faint sound of the river in the background. Everything was exactly as I remembered it, every detail matching my memory perfectly, until I reached the bench. On the screen, I watched myself stop walking. I watched my flashlight beam settle on the bench, illuminating it clearly in the darkness. And the bench was empty. There was no one sitting there. No dark jacket, no work boots, no figure turning to look at me. Just wooden slats and shadows and nothing else. I kept watching, unable to look away, my stomach churning with something between fear and disbelief. On the video, I heard myself speak. "Police officer, just checking on you, making sure everything's okay." My voice sounded normal, professional, exactly the way I always sound during a contact. But after I spoke, there was silence. Complete silence. No one answered. No calm voice saying "Evening, officer." No polite response at all. Just the ambient sounds of the park, the river, the wind in the trees, and nothing else. Then I heard myself speak again, asking another question, and again there was no reply. I was having a conversation with myself. I was asking questions and then pausing, waiting, responding to answers that weren't there. The most disturbing part was watching my own movements. On the footage, I could see myself gesture with my hands the way I do when I'm talking to someone. I saw myself nod, the camera angle shifting slightly as my head moved. I saw myself extend my hand, reaching out for something. That was when I was taking his license, I realized. I was reaching out to accept the driver's license he handed me. But on the video, my hand just hung there in empty space, fingers closing around nothing. I watched myself bring my empty hand up to my face, tilting it toward my flashlight beam like I was examining something. I watched myself speak again, reading information off a license that didn't exist. Date of birth, address, physical description. I said it all out loud to no one, about nothing. I paused the video and put my head in my hands. My pulse was racing, my thoughts spinning in circles that led nowhere. This wasn't possible. Cameras don't lie. Body cams are designed to capture exactly what's happening, to provide an objective record that can be used in court, that can determine the difference between guilt and innocence. They're reliable. They're accurate. They don't just fail to record entire human beings. I tried to think of explanations. Any explanation that would make this make sense. Maybe the man had been wearing something that interfered with the camera. Some kind of special clothing that didn't show up on video. But that was insane. That's not how cameras work. That's not how anything works. There was no rational explanation. None. I played the video again, scrubbing forward to different points, watching myself from multiple angles. At one point, I saw myself turn slightly, following something with my eyes. That was when he stood up, I remembered. When the conversation was ending and he shifted his weight like he was about to leave. But on the footage, I was turning to look at nothing. My eyes were tracking empty air. My head was moving, following the movements of a person who wasn't there. I looked like someone suffering from a severe hallucination. I looked like I had completely lost my mind, but I hadn't. I was sure of that. I had been lucid, alert, completely in control. I had asked the right questions and followed proper procedure. Everything I did was by the book. The only problem was that the person I did it with didn't exist. I checked the camera itself, looking for damage, for any sign that it had malfunctioned. Nothing. It was in perfect condition. No scratches, no cracks, no dirt on the lens. I checked the software logs to see if there had been any errors during the recording or upload. Nothing. Everything had processed normally. I even checked the timestamp to make sure I was watching the right footage, that I hadn't somehow clicked on the wrong file. I hadn't. This was it. This was the official record of my suspicious person contact at Riverside Park, and it showed an officer walking up to an empty bench, having a 10-minute conversation with nobody, and then walking away. If anyone else watched this footage, they would think I was crazy. They would think I needed to be evaluated, taken off duty, maybe committed. I didn't know what to do. I sat there in that small room, the fluorescent light buzzing overhead, the computer screen glowing in front of me, and I felt more alone than I've ever felt in my life. Who could I tell about this? Who would believe me? I barely believed it myself, and I had lived through it. I could still feel the cold air of that park on my face. I could still hear his voice in my memory, clear and calm, answering my questions. I could still see his face when I closed my eyes, that unremarkable face with the scar above the eyebrow. All of it was real to me. All of it had happened. But the evidence said otherwise. The only objective record of that night told a completely different story. I made a decision that I still don't know if it was right or wrong. I saved a copy of the footage to my personal drive, something that wasn't strictly allowed, but that officers did all the time. Then I went back to my report, the one I had already submitted, and I stared at it for a long time. Subject contacted, identified as David Miller. But had I really contacted anyone? Had I really identified anyone? According to my Bodycam, the answer was no. I had contacted no one. I had identified no one. I had stood in an empty park and talked to myself for 10 minutes. I didn't change the report. I couldn't bring myself to, because doing that would mean admitting that what I remembered, what I knew had happened, wasn't real. And I wasn't ready to do that. I'm still not ready. I logged out of the computer and left the room, walking past my colleagues without making eye contact. I clocked out, got in my car, and drove home in a daze. The sun was coming up by then, the sky turning pink and orange on the horizon, and the world looked so normal, so ordinary. People were starting their days, drinking their coffee, complaining about traffic, thinking about work. None of them knew what I had just experienced. None of them would believe it if I told them. I pulled into my driveway, turned off the engine, and sat there for a long time, watching the light change on my house. My wife was probably awake by now, making breakfast, getting ready for her day. I would have to go inside and pretend everything was fine. I would have to act like my entire understanding of reality hadn't just been shattered by a 10-minute video of myself talking to empty air. I started digging. And the thing about digging is that sometimes you find things you wish you hadn't, but I couldn't let it go. I couldn't just pretend that night never happened. Couldn't file the experience away and move on with my life like nothing was wrong. I had questions and I needed answers. So a few days later, after I'd had some time to process what I'd seen on that footage, I decided to show it to someone. I picked Martinez, a guy I'd worked with for almost 8 years, someone I trusted. We were alone in the break room, and I told him I had something weird to show him, something I couldn't explain. He made a joke about it being my dance moves or something, but when he saw the look on my face, he stopped laughing. I pulled out my phone, where I'd transferred a copy of the footage, and hit play. Martinez watched the whole thing without saying a word. I watched his face instead of the screen, looking for his reaction, hoping he would see something I'd missed, something that would explain everything. When it ended, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at me and asked if this was some kind of prank. I told him it wasn't. I told him I had stood there, in that park, and had a full conversation with a man who was sitting on that bench. I told him about the license, the name, the address, every detail I could remember. He watched it again, leaning closer to the screen this time, and I could see the confusion on his face turning into something else. Discomfort, unease. He handed my phone back and said he didn't know what to tell me. Sighed maybe the camera glitched. Said maybe I should get some sleep. He didn't look me in the eye when he said it. I showed it to a few other people over the next week. Officers I trusted. People who knew me well enough to know I wasn't the type to make things up. The reactions were all variations of the same thing. Some laughed nervously and made jokes about me losing my mind. Some watched in silence and then changed the subject, clearly not wanting to engage with something they couldn't explain. One guy, Patterson, watched it 3 times and then told me to delete it. Just get rid of it, he said. Whatever this is, you don't want it following you around. He wouldn't elaborate on what he meant by that, and when I pressed him, he just shook his head and walked away. None of them had answers. None of them could tell me what I had seen that night, and none of them wanted to talk about it more than once. I decided to approach it like an investigation. If I couldn't explain what happened to me, maybe I could at least verify the details, find something concrete to hold on to. I started with the call itself. Someone had reported a suspicious person at Riverside Park that night. Someone had picked up a phone and dialed dispatch. That call had to have come from somewhere. I went to our records department and requested the original dispatch log, the one that showed where calls came from and what numbers were associated with them. The clerk gave me a printout, and I found the entry for that night. Suspicious person, Riverside Park, East Entrance, 417 A.M. The number that had placed the call was listed right there. I wrote it down and went back to my desk. I tried calling the number. It rang once, then gave me a message saying the number was no longer in service. I thought maybe it was a burner phone, a prepaid cell that someone had used and thrown away. That happens sometimes, but something made me dig deeper. I ran the number through our database, looking for any other calls associated with it, any records of its use. What I found made my blood run cold. That number had been disconnected for over 40 years. It hadn't been in service since 1982. That was impossible. You can't place a call from a number that doesn't exist. You can't report a suspicious person using a line that was disconnected before I was even born. But there it was, right in our records. A call from a dead number, reporting a man who didn't exist, sending me to a park where I would talk to empty air. I started researching the park next, looking for anything unusual in its history. Riverside Park had been there for almost 100 years, originally built as part of a city beautification project in the early 1900s. I found old newspaper articles about its opening, about events that had been held there, about renovations and improvements over the decades. Most of it was mundane. But then I found something that made me stop scrolling. An article from October 1981, almost exactly 43 years before my encounter. The headline read, "Body found at Riverside Park, police suspect foul play." I clicked on it, my heart pounding, and started reading. A man had been found dead on a bench near the east entrance, not far from the old bridge. He had been strangled. The case was never solved. The victim's name was David Miller. I read that name and felt the room spin around me. David Miller, age 38, employed at a manufacturing plant on the east side of town. Found deceased on the morning of October 23, 1981, seated on a park bench as if he had simply fallen asleep. Cause of death was ligature strangulation, but no murder weapon was ever recovered. No suspects were ever identified. The case went cold within months and was eventually filed away with dozens of other unsolved homicides from that era. I stared at the article for a long time, reading and rereading the details. The same name, the same job, the same location. The man I had talked to that night, the man who had shown me his driver's license and answered all my questions, had been dead for over 4 decades. I couldn't stop there. I needed to know more. I started going through old police records, looking for anything else related to Riverside Park, anything unusual that might have happened there over the years. It took me almost a week of searching, pulling old files, reading through faded reports that hadn't been digitized. And then I found something that proved I wasn't alone in this. A report from 1994, 13 years after David Miller's death. An officer named Hernandez had responded to a suspicious person call at Riverside Park, East Entrance, near the old bridge. He had contacted a male subject sitting on a bench, had a brief conversation, and cleared the scene without incident. But someone had attached a handwritten note to the report. It said, "Reviewed bodycam footage, discrepancy noted, subject not visible on recording. No further action taken." Officer Hernandez had declined to comment. I tried to find Hernandez to talk to him about what had happened. He had retired from the department in 2003 and passed away in 2015. I was too late, but I did find his partner from that era, a woman named Delgado who had also retired but was still living in the area. I called her, introduced myself, and asked if she remembered anything unusual about her time at Riverside Park. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then she asked me why I wanted to know. I told her the truth. I told her about my encounter, about the footage, about the name David Miller. She was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. Then she said something that I'll never forget. She said, "You saw him too?" Not a question, a statement. "You saw him too." Delgado told me that Hernandez had never been the same after that night in '94. He'd become withdrawn, paranoid, obsessed with the Miller case. He'd spent years trying to solve it, convinced that if he could find the killer, whatever he'd seen at that park would stop, but he never did. The case stayed cold, and Hernandez eventually gave up and retired. She said he'd told her once, near the end of his career, that he still saw the man sometimes. Not at the park, in other places, on the street, in crowds. Always just for a moment, always just at the edge of his vision, and then gone. She said Hernandez believed that David Miller was still out there, still sitting on that bench, waiting for someone to listen. waiting for someone to solve the case, waiting for someone to help him. I thanked her for talking to me and hung up. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely put down the phone. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't alone. But that somehow made everything worse. I don't know what I saw that night. I've spent months trying to understand it, trying to fit it into some kind of framework that makes sense, and I've failed. I used to be the kind of person who needed rational explanations for everything. I was a cop for 15 years because I believed in facts and evidence, in things you could prove and document. I believed that the world operated according to rules, and if something didn't make sense, it was only because you didn't have all the information yet. I don't believe that anymore. Some things don't have explanations. Some things exist outside the neat little boxes we try to put them in. And some things, no matter how much you investigate, will never make sense. David Miller has been dead for over 40 years. But I talked to him. I know I did. The case still haunts me. Not just what happened that night, but the original murder. Someone killed David Miller in 1981 and got away with it. Someone strangled him on that bench and walked away, and no one ever paid for it. I've read everything I could find about the case. Every report, every interview, every dead end the detectives hit back then. There were no witnesses, no fingerprints, no motive that anyone could identify. He was just a regular guy, working class, no enemies, no debts, no secret life that anyone knew about. He went to work, came home, loved his wife, and one night he went to the park and never came back. The kind of case that falls through the cracks because there's nothing to grab onto. The kind of case that stays unsolved forever. I've thought about trying to solve it myself. Delgado told me that Hernandez spent years trying, convinced that was what Miller wanted. That finding his killer would somehow set him free. Maybe she's right. Maybe that's why he appears to people, why he sits on that bench waiting for someone to stop and talk to him. Maybe he's asking for help in the only way he can. But how do you solve a murder that's over 4 decades old? The witnesses are dead or gone. The evidence has degraded or been destroyed. The killer, whoever they were, is probably in the ground themselves by now. Some justice can never be served. Some wrongs can never be made right. And some victims are left waiting forever. What I do know is that I've changed. My wife noticed it first. She said I seemed distant, distracted, like part of me was always somewhere else. She's right. Part of me is still in that park, standing in front of that bench, talking to a man who wasn't there. I jump at shadows now. I notice things I never would have noticed before. The flicker of movement at the edge of my vision. The feeling of being watched when I'm alone. The way certain places feel heavier than others, like the air itself is thick with something you can't see. I never used to believe in any of that. Now I'm not so sure. Now I keep my mind open to possibilities I would have laughed at a year ago, because I've seen the impossible with my own eyes, even if no camera in the world could record it. I don't know what my Bodycam didn't see. That's the part that keeps me up at night. The camera was working. The footage was clear. It recorded everything, my voice, my movements, the park around me. But it didn't record him. It couldn't see what I could see. And that makes me wonder what else is out there just beyond the edge of what our technology can capture. What else walks among us that we can't prove exists? How many people have had experiences like mine and stayed silent because they knew no one would believe them? How many David Millers are out there, sitting on benches in empty parks, waiting for someone to notice them? I'll never know, but I think about it more than I should. There's one more thing I need to tell you before I finish. Something that happened a few weeks after I started my investigation. I was at home, sitting in my living room, going through some old files I'd copied from the department archives. My wife was asleep upstairs, and the house was quiet. I had the footage from that night pulled up on my laptop, the same footage I'd watched hundreds of times. I was scrubbing through it slowly, looking for anything I might have missed, any detail that could help me understand. And then I saw something that made my heart stop. Something I had never noticed before, no matter how many times I'd watched. At the very end of the recording, After I turned away from the bench and started walking back to my patrol car, the camera briefly captured the bench one more time. It was just for a second, maybe less, as my body turned and the angle shifted. In all my previous viewings, I'd focused on the part where I was talking, where I was standing in front of the bench. I'd never paid attention to those final moments, but this time I did. And in that brief glimpse, that fraction of a second when the bench was visible in the corner of the frame, it wasn't empty anymore. There was a figure sitting there. Just a shape, dark and indistinct, barely visible in the shadows. But it was there. He was there, watching me walk away. I've frozen that frame. I've enhanced it, zoomed in, done everything I can to make it clearer. It never gets clearer. It's always just a shape. Just a suggestion of a person sitting where no person should be. But I know what I'm looking at. I know who I'm looking at. David Miller was there that night. He was there the whole time. And for some reason, the camera could only see him when I wasn't looking, when my back was turned, when I was walking away. I don't know what that means. I don't know if I want to know. But every time I watch that footage now, every single time, I watch the whole thing. Every second. Every frame, just to make sure I'm really alone. I still work the night shift. I still patrol the same streets, respond to the same kinds of calls, do the same job I've done for 15 years. But I never take that route through Riverside Park anymore. I go around it, even if it adds 10 minutes to my drive. I can't bring myself to go back there. I can't risk seeing that bench again, seeing him again. Some of my colleagues think I'm being paranoid. Some of them think I've lost my edge. Maybe they're right. Maybe the night I spent talking to a dead man broke something inside me that can't be fixed. But I'd rather be paranoid than go back to that park. I'd rather add 10 minutes to my commute than face whatever is waiting for me there. If you're watching this, you probably think I'm crazy. I would too, if I were you. A cop who claims he talked to a ghost. That sounds like the kind of story someone makes up for attention, or the kind of delusion that gets you put on administrative leave. But I'm not making this up. I'm not delusional. I have the footage to prove it, or at least to prove that something impossible happened that night. You can believe me or not. That's your choice. All I can do is tell you what I experienced and let you decide for yourself. But if you take anything from my story, let it be this. Pay attention. Watch the shadows. Listen to the silence. Because you never know who might be sitting in the dark, waiting for someone to notice them, waiting for someone to help. And that's where I'll leave it. That's the story of the night I made a routine stop and my Bodycam showed I was talking to thin air. A man named David Miller, dead for over 40 years, sitting on the same bench where he was murdered, still waiting for someone to solve his case, still waiting for justice. I don't know if I'll ever be able to give him that. I don't know if anyone can, but I think about him every night when I put on my uniform. I think about him every time I review my footage. And sometimes, late at night when the city is quiet and I'm alone in my patrol car, I swear I can still hear his voice. Calm, polite, patient. Evening, officer. Like he's waiting for me to come back. Like he knows I will eventually. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. This is the kind of story that's hard to tell and even harder to believe. But I needed to share it. I needed someone else to know what happened. So drop a comment below. Tell me what you think. Have you ever experienced something you couldn't explain? Have you ever seen someone who wasn't there? Talk to someone who couldn't exist? I want to know. I want to know I'm not alone in this. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one. Real accounts from people who work the job, people who've seen things they can't forget. I'll see you in the next one. Stay safe out there. And if you ever find yourself at Riverside Park late at night, do me a favor. Don't stop at the bench by the old bridge. Just keep walking. Trust me on that one. Just keep walking.